2 months before the auction, my family held an emergency meeting about saving our farm at the farmhouse kitchen table I grew up eating breakfast at, and 4 minutes into it, my sister-in-law turned to me with her committee smile and said, "Lois, you don't need to stay for this part. This is a money conversation." A money conversation. There were 9 people at that table, friends, and every one of them believed the same thing about me. And they had believed it for 20 years, and none of them had ever once checked. They believed I was poor. Poor Lois. The single aunt with the little house and the library job and the 14-year-old hatchback, the one you hand the coat down to, the one you seat by the kitchen, the one who nursed grandma for 6 years for free because, bless her, what else does she have going on? And I stood up from my own mother's kitchen table, friends, and I picked up my purse and I said, "Of course, you all take your time." And I want to tell you what was in that purse while I walked out to my hatchback past the barn my grandfather raised in 1911. A letter from my bank, 3 days old, confirming liquid funds available on demand in an amount, friends, that was larger than every debt that family was about to cry over, plus the farm, plus every truck in that yard, with room left over. They sent the poor relation out of the money conversation, and the poor relation walked to her car holding more money than the conversation. Before we go back to the beginning, 3 promises so you know exactly what kind of night you are settling in for. First, there is a china cabinet in this story. It is the only thing my father left me when he left my brother 160 acres. And in 2006, 3 years after his funeral, I found what was taped behind its bottom drawer. And it had been waiting there for me the whole time, and you are going to hear every word of it, and I will warn you now, it rearranged my entire life, and it may rearrange your evening. Second, the auction. The county foreclosure auction where our family farm went on the block in front of 200 neighbors, where a developer with capped teeth planned to fold it into a subdivision called, I am not making this up, Heritage Meadows. You are going to stand next to me in that crowd, friends, and you are going to feel the bidding pass everyone's worst fears, and then you are going to hear the auctioneer ask the winning bidder to state her name for the record, and you are going to hear a county fairground go so quiet you could hear the flag rope clank. He had to say my name 3 times, friends, not because they did not hear it, because they could not file it. And third, what came after. Because half of you think you know how this ends, the family that threw me out of the money conversation comes crawling, and the farm goes back to them, and we all eat pie. No, friends. What I did with that farm surprised my family more than the paddle did, and there is a sign hanging at the gate today. And when I tell you what it says and who painted it, you will understand what this whole story was actually about. It was never about the money, it was about the name. If you have ever been the relative they pity in public and use in private, the one whose whole worth got decided 20 years ago and never once reappraised, do one thing for me, tap that like button, subscribe if you want more quiet ones with bank letters, and tell me in the comments what your family thinks you have, and whether they have ever once checked. My name is Lois. I am 44 years old. I have been a librarian in this county for 22 years, and everyone thought I had nothing, friends, right up until my name was called. Stay with me. Every acre of this story gets walked before we are done. To understand the auction, you have to understand the will, and to understand the will, you have to understand 2003. So come back with me, and I will make it quick, the way rain is quick, which is to say it soaks everything and moves on. The Hartley Farm is 160 acres of the best dirt in this county, homesteaded by my great-grandfather, barn-raised 1911, white farmhouse with a porch that faces the sunrise because my grandmother refused to face it any other way. I was born in the upstairs bedroom, second window from the left. Hold that window, friends. I am going to stand at it again before this story is over, and so are you. There were 2 of us, my brother Charles, older by 3 years, and me. And I am going to tell you the plain truth about the 2 of us and the land, because the whole story grows out of this one crooked seed. Charles was raised to run the farm. I was raised to help. And friends, the joke of it, the quiet 50-year joke of it, was that I was the farmer, not him, me. I was the one who could smell rain coming off the west field before the radio knew. I was the one who kept the hen accounts at 9 years old in a composition book, feed against eggs against market price, columns straight as fence wire, and my father used to take that composition book to the diner friends and show it to other men. I have that on witness authority. 3 separate old farmers told me at his funeral, "Your daddy used to show us your little book, said you had the head for it in the family. Said it at the diner. Never once said it at our supper table." That was my father, friends, and I want to be fair to him tonight, because before this story ends, you are going to find out he was better than his times, and worse than his heart, and the two of those things fought over one piece of tape for 50 years. Charles got the mornings with Dad in the truck. I got the kitchen with Mother, and the hen house and the books when nobody was looking. And in the spring of 2003, my father's heart stopped in the seed store, between the counter and the door, and he was 53 years old. And when the will was read in a lawyer's office above the bank, it took 4 minutes. The farm, the land, the equipment, the accounts, all of it, every acre and axle, to Charles. And to my beloved daughter Lois, my mother's china cabinet, and the contents thereof. The contents thereof, friends, remember those 3 words, lawyers' words. They are going to matter more than the acres. I was 21 years old, sitting in a wooden chair in that office in my good dress, and I want to tell you honestly what I felt, because this channel runs on the truth. I was not surprised. That is the part that should break your heart, friends. It has taken me 20 years to let it break mine. Farms still went to sons in this county in 2003, the way water goes downhill. It was not a decision anybody watched being made. It was just the plumbing of the times, and I sat in that chair and nodded, and Charles shook the lawyer's hand as the new owner of everything our name had ever built. And on the sidewalk after, my brother, 24 years old and suddenly 160 acres tall, put his hand on my shoulder and said the sentence he would spend 20 years never living down. He said, "Don't worry, Lois. There will always be a place for you at the farm. A place for me, at my own farm, friends." He meant it kindly. That is the poison of it. He meant it kindly, and I said thank you. And 1 year later, I had a library science certificate and a rented room in town, and a job at the county library at $11 an hour, and the farm had become somewhere I was invited, for Thanksgiving, for canning season, for every occasion when love was needed in its free labor form. And that arrangement, friends, that exact arrangement, held for 2 decades. And it might have held forever if my brother's son had not discovered leverage the way a toddler discovers matches. But first, the cabinet. It sat in my rented room, and then in the little house I bought in 2008, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, paid off in 12 years flat, and for 3 years after the funeral, I could hardly look at it. Friends, because it was not furniture to me. It was a verdict. Walnut, glass doors, my mother's wedding china behind them. And every time I passed it, it said the same thing. This is what a daughter is worth. 1 cabinet. And then came a Saturday in March of 2006, and I was finally moving it away from a wall to paint, and it is a heavy old beast, and I had to take the drawers out to shift it. And when I pulled the bottom drawer all the way free, friends, something on the underside of it caught the light. Tape. Old cellophane tape, 4 strips of it, gone amber, holding a fat envelope flat against the wood, where it could sit for 100 years and never be found by anyone who was not moving the cabinet alone. By anyone, friends who had not been left the contents thereof. I sat down on my floor with a paintbrush still in my other hand, and I peeled that envelope loose, and inside there was a silver dollar, 1941, worn smooth at the edges, and 3 pages in my father's handwriting, and I am going to give them to you now because I promised, and because I have waited a long time for a room full of people who would hear them right. It said, "Lois, if you are reading this, then the will has been read, and you have had some time to be angry, and I hope you had the sense to be angrier than you showed, because you always did swallow it too quick, girl. You are asking why Charles got the ground and you got the wood. Here is the answer, and it is not a good one, but it is the true one, and a man ought to leave his daughter at least one true thing. The time's won, Lois. The banker looks at Charles and sees a farmer. He looks at you and sees a wife that hasn't happened yet. If I split this ground between you, the first bad harvest, the bank would eat your half alive and call it prudence, and your brother would fight for his half and let yours go. Not out of meanness, out of blindness. And I could not do that to the ground or to you. I was not strong enough to fight the times, girl. I am ashamed of it in the exact place where I am proudest of you, and those two have been quarreling in my chest for years, and now you know why I couldn't ever say the thing out loud at supper. But hear this, because it is the part I mean. You were always the farmer, Lois. Charles has the hands, but you have the head, and the head is the farm. You knew it at 9 years old with that composition book, and I knew it watching you, and I showed that book to half the county because I could not figure out how to show it to you. So here is my last instruction, and it comes with the only seed money I have to give behind your brother's back. This dollar is the first one my father ever paid me off this ground, minted 1941, older than the both of us, and I have carried it since I was a boy, and it goes to the farmer, and that is you. Plant where they can't trample, girl. Any dirt will do. Money is dirt too. It grows whatever you put in it, and nobody ever asks the quiet ones what they are growing. And someday, when the wheel turns, and it always turns, you will be standing there holding the harvest, and whatever is left of this family will finally see what I saw at that supper table every night, and never once said, "Forgive me the cabinet. It was the only thing in that house that was ever really your mother's, and she told me once it should go to you. And the letter needed somewhere to wait. Your father, Emmett Hartley." Friends, I sat on the floor of my little house with wet paint drying on a brush, and I read those 3 pages 4 times, and I want to tell you what I did that afternoon, because it is the hinge of this whole story. I did not cry first. I cried second. First, I got up and I found the composition book, the hen book, which I had kept, because our family keeps things. It is the whole disease and the whole cure, and I sat at my kitchen table, 24 years old, and I opened it to the first clean page in 15 years, and I wrote at the top in fence wire columns, March 2006, planting. And that Monday, on my lunch break from the library, I walked into the credit union and asked a confused young man how a person buys shares in an index fund, and I put in $300, which was most of what I had, and the 1941 silver dollar stayed in my pocket the whole time, and it has been in my pocket for every financial decision I have made for 20 years, friends. It is in my pocket right now, and now you know what nobody in my family ever knew. The poor relation had a program. $50 from every paycheck, friends, from 2006 on, rain or shine, raised whenever the library gave me a step increase, because I never once raised my life to match my wage. The little house instead of the bigger one. The hatchback until it quit, then another hatchback. Coffee at home, seeds in the ground. And do you know what I had working for me that no stockbroker in this state had, friends? The library. I was a librarian sitting 8 feet from every financial newspaper and every investing book ever published, free, renewable, and quiet, and I read all of them and the internet terminals besides. I could tell you the expense ratio of anything moving, and every lunch hour the Wall Street Journal came to me like a church bulletin. The town thought the spinster librarian was doing crosswords back there. I was doing arithmetic. Friends, 20 years of arithmetic. I am not going to drag you decade by decade. Compounding is the one miracle that is boring to watch. That is rather its secret. Nobody guards against a glacier. I will just give you the mile markers, the way I gave them to my composition book. 2006, $300 and a silver dollar. 2011, 31,000, and I remember the day it crossed 30 because 30,000 was near what the farm had grossed the year my father died, and I sat in my car in the library lot and laughed like a woman with a secret, which is what I was. And I will confess the glacier carried 2 boulders, friends, because a librarian reads the future in circulation numbers. In 2006, I put real money into the company making the little music player half this county wore on a wire in its ears. and a little more into the bookstore that had quietly decided to sell everything else on earth too, and I bought early and I held stubborn, and I have never once apologized to an index fund for it. 2016, 290,000. 2021, 1.1 million, and that was the year. Friends, I want this on the record that my nephew Todd stood in my little kitchen, 21 years old, looked around at my old countertops and said to his girlfriend, "Not quietly enough, this is why you get a career, babe." And the month my brother Charles died, 2 years ago, a woman who had never earned more than $54,000 in a year closed her composition book on a number, friends, that I am only going to say once because my mother raised me not to shout in the library. $2.1 million. Poor Lois, the one who did not need to stay for the money conversation. Now, while the glacier moved, I want to show you what 20 years of being poor Lois actually felt like. Because the money is only half this story, friends, and it is the smaller half. The other half is what a family does to the member it has decided is nothing, and how they never, ever check their math. Understand, nobody was cruel in the movie way. Nobody locked me in the cellar. What they did was file me, friends, the way my library filed pamphlets, and the label on my folder said, harmless, available, and slightly sad, and once a family laminates your label, no evidence on earth gets it reprinted. The evidence they had, a small house, an old car, no husband, no children, a librarian's cardigan. Case closed, friends, and it stayed closed for 2 decades. And here are 3 exhibits from the file, because you deserve specifics. This channel runs on specifics. Exhibit 1, the coat. Every few winters, my sister-in-law Arlene, Charles's wife, queen consort of my mother's kitchen, would arrive at Christmas with a garment bag and that voice, the charity voice, you know the voice, and she would say, "Lois, I am cleaning closets, and this coat is practically new, and it would be wrong of me not to think of you. Wrong of her not to think of me, friends." And I took the coats. For 20 years I took the coats and said thank you, and wore them. And here is the truth I can finally afford. I took them because refusing would have required explaining, and explaining was the one thing my program could not survive. My camouflage, friends, was their contempt, and every hand-me-down was another layer of it, and some Decembers, buttoning up Arlene's last-year coat over a 7-figure secret, I would catch my own eye in the hall mirror and think, "Girl, you are the best-dressed woman in this county, and nobody will know it for years." Exhibit 2, the labor. When my mother's mind began to go, a dozen years ago, the family had exactly one meeting about it, at that same kitchen table, and the meeting took 11 minutes. Because the solution was so obvious, nobody even dressed it up. Lois will do it. Lois has no family. Lois has that flexible little job. And Lois did it, friends, 6 years. Every evening after the library and every weekend at the farmhouse in the room I was born in, spooning supper into the mouth of the woman who taught me to can tomatoes, while my brother farmed his inheritance 40 feet away, and Arlene managed the difficult parts, by which I mean she managed to be elsewhere. I do not regret 1 hour of those 6 years, hear me. Those hours were mine and mother's, and some of them were the finest of my life. And that is exactly what made the family arithmetic so filthy, friends. They billed my love like it was surplus, like it was a resource the property produced. Hay, eggs, Lois. When Mother died, Arlene stood up at the funeral lunch and thanked, publicly by name, the hospice service that had come the last 9 days. 9 days, friends. I had done 6 years. My name did not come up. And Exhibit 3, the table. This one is small, and it is the one that cut deepest, and if you have lived my life, you already know it will be the small one that does it. Every Thanksgiving at the farmhouse, my mother's good china, the china from my cabinet's twin sister set, came out, and the long dining table sat 12, and there were always more than 12 of us, so a card table went up in the kitchen doorway for the overflow, and friends, in 20 years of Thanksgivings, guess who never once, not one single year, graduated to the long table? Guests made it. Todd's college roommates made it. Arlene's Bible study substitutes made it. The overflow was me, friends, me, and whichever children were currently too young to protest. And one year, when I was 26 years old, my 6-year-old niece looked at me over the card table and asked, with the beautiful cruelty of children, "Aunt Lois, are you a kid too?" And I said, "Apparently, sweetheart, pass the rolls." And everybody who overheard it laughed, and Arlene laughed the loudest, and told that story for years. Are you a kid too? Oh, poor Lois. There is a fourth exhibit, friends, and I saved it out of order because it is not like the others. The others show you what my family thought of me. This one shows you what the county thought, and the distance between those two measurements is the whole tragedy of families like mine. 3 years ago, the county library turned 100 years old, and the Friends of the Library organized a centennial celebration, and somewhere in the planning, a committee member confessed to me later, it quietly became a celebration of the library lady too, and they told me it would be cake in the community room, friends, and I believed them, because I am apparently exactly as easy to surprise as everyone else in this story. It was not cake in the community room. It was 240 people, friends. They had to move it to the high school gymnasium. 3 generations of this county came out for that library, and it turned out for the library lady, and I stood in that gym while parents stood up and told the crowd I had taught their children to read in the summer programs, some of those children standing beside them taller than their fathers now, and a young doctor, home for the weekend, held up the interlibrary loan slip I had filed for her in 2009 to get a medical text no one else would chase down. She had framed it, friends framed, and she said, "This piece of paper is why I believed a girl from this county could go to medical school." The mayor read a proclamation. The high school choir sang, off-key in the middle, "God love them." And a man I did not recognize, my age, stood up at the microphone and said, "Miss Hartley won't remember this." But in 2004, she was the only person at that bank of study carols who ever looked like she believed I would pass the GED, and I passed it, and my kids both finished college, and that started at her desk. 2004, friends. The year after the will. The same season my family appraised me at one china cabinet. A man I barely knew was building his whole family's future on an hour of my believing in him, and neither valuation ever met the other, for 20 years in the same small county. 240 people in a gymnasium. And do you know who was not there, friends? You know. You already know. Arlene had a conflict. Todd had the event barn contractors. The cousins sent a card, one card, jointly, with a gift certificate to a chain restaurant one town over. And I want to be fair, Charles came, my brother came, and stood at the back in his good jacket looking baffled by the size of it. And afterward, he said to me, in the parking lot, with genuine wonder, "Friends? Genuine?" He said, "I had no idea people knew you. I had no idea people knew you." 41 years my brother had known me, friends, and the knowing of me by others struck him as news. That is what a file does. It does not just hide your money. It hides your entire existence, and the family holding the file is always the last to know who they have been living beside. And the saddest part, the part I want the families watching this to hear, is that it costs them more than it costs us. I got a gymnasium, friends. They missed it. And one more scene from the pity machine. The best one, the one I have been saving, because the dramatic irony in it could power the county grid. About a year after Charles died, when Todd was raising money for the event barn scheme, he came to my little house, friends, my nephew came to me, sat at my kitchen table, ate 2 slices of my pie, and pitched me. Now understand what this was. This was not Todd asking rich Aunt Lois to invest. No. This was charity, friends, charity flowing downhill to the poor relation. Todd had cooked up what he called a family and friends round, little pieces for little people. And he slid a brochure across my table, glossy, the barn all lit up at night with string lights, and he said, and I am quoting my nephew word for word because some sentences you laminate. He said, "Aunt Lois, even you could do a small piece of this. Like 5,000. I know that's probably your whole rainy day fund, but honestly, it'd mean you were part of something for once. Part of something for once." Friends, At the moment my nephew said those words, the rainy day fund he was estimating at $5,000 stood at a little over 1.9 million, and its custodian had spent that very morning reading the barn scheme's own numbers in the county filings because I read everything, and I had already concluded the thing was a haircut looking for a head. And I looked at my nephew, friends, over the pie, and I gave the performance of my career. I twisted my ring. I looked worried. I said, "Oh, Todd, honey, I don't really understand those investment things, the stock market and all that. It all just seems like gambling to me. I'd better keep my little bit in the passbook where I can see it." And Todd, friends, my nephew Todd, reached across my own table and patted my hand, patted it, and said, "No, you're right. It's probably not for you. Don't worry about it," and finished my pie and drove back to his leverage, and I stood at my window watching his truck go, holding a secret the size of the county, thinking, girl, either that boy sinks the farm or I am the best actress never to leave this zip code. Both, friends. It turned out to be both. So, that is the file they kept on me. Now let me show you the one member of that family who ever peeked inside mine. Because she matters, friends. She matters enormously before this is over. Sage. Todd's little sister, my niece, the 6-year-old from the card table, all grown up now, 24, with dirt permanently under her nails by choice, the only Hartley in 2 generations who ever walked the fence lines for pleasure. Sage got filed early too, friends. Filed under difficult, because she declined the sorority her mother picked, studied horticulture instead of marketing, and came home from college talking about soil health at tables where the men talked about acreage like it was a scoreboard. The family funneled her toward me the way they funnel everything inconvenient toward me. Oh, Sage can ride with Lois and friends. The 2 files sat in the same drawer and found out they liked each other. For years, she has come to my little house on Sundays, and we bake, and she borrows my pruning saws. And somewhere in there, she started noticing things, because the difficult ones always notice. She noticed the Wall Street Journal in my recycling. She noticed that when she asked me a question about her college loan interest, I answered it a little too well, and a little too fast, and then made pie noises to cover it. And one Sunday, about a year before everything, she was in my kitchen when I took my composition book from the drawer to make a note. And I was careless. Friends, 20 years of careful, and I was careless exactly once. And Sage looked at the fence wire columns from across the table, too far to read the numbers, close enough to read the years. And she went very quiet. And then she said, "Aunt Lois, that book is older than I am." And I said, "It is, honey. It is the hen book." And Sage looked at me for a long moment, my mother's chin on that girl, and she said, "Are there still hens in it?" And I said, "Of a kind." And friends, she never asked another question, not one. She just started, from that Sunday on, saying a thing as she left, every time, hand on the doorframe. She would say, "Need me to drive you anywhere this week?" Just that. For a year, friends. And sometimes I did, and she drove me to the bank, to the courthouse annex, to a lawyer's office 2 counties over where nobody knows our name, and she sat in the truck in the parking lot with her thermos, asking nothing, guarding everything, and if you want to know how the quiet ones recognize each other, that is how. Not with questions, with rides. Now the fall of the farm, friends, and I will give it to you the way the county got it, fast and downhill. My brother Charles died 2 years ago in the West Field on his tractor, which if you knew Charles was the only way he was ever going to agree to go, and I stood at his funeral and grieved him true, friends, because this story is not about hating Charles. Charles was not my enemy. Charles was the other child of the same crooked seed. He got handed a kingdom at 24 with no instructions except don't lose it, and he spent 20 years afraid of exactly that, and we never once spoke of the will. Not in 2 decades, and only once did he come close. The last Christmas before his heart quit, he stood next to me at the kitchen window, both of us watching snow come across the west field, and he said, "Out of nothing, you know, Dad used to say you could smell rain coming before the radio." And I said, "I still can, Charles." And my brother looked at that field a long time, and he said, quiet, almost to the glass, "It should have been both our names on this window." That is all he ever said, friends. One sentence, 20 years late, aimed at a window. I have decided to keep it. Men of that make do not produce a second one. The farm went to Todd, of course. The plumbing of the times, one more generation down the same pipe, and friends. Todd is what happens when the inheritance gets handed down, but the fear does not. Charles was afraid of losing the farm. Todd was bored of it. Todd, 24 years old, half a business degree, and a full pickup truck, had spent his short adult life circling the property like a man waiting for it to become money, and 11 months after the funeral, he found his instrument. An outfit from the city sold him a vision, friends, agritourism destination, event barn, weddings, a corn maze with a corporate sponsor, a tasting room, and all it took was capital, and all capital took was the one thing our family had never once put at risk in 110 years: the dirt. Todd mortgaged the farm. Not a little, friends. $412,000 against land that had never carried a nickel of debt since the homestead patent, and he did it fast and proud, and Arlene toasted him at Easter for finally thinking big, and the one person at that table who could read a term sheet sat at the card table in the doorway, uninvited to the thinking. I am not going to make you watch 2 years of it. The event barn came in double over budget. The corporate sponsor evaporated. The weddings that were booked got canceled by a bride's lawyer when the grand opening slipped twice, and by the second spring, friends, Todd was borrowing from one hand to wave at the other, and the operating loan got called, and the mortgage went 90 days past due, and the bank, which knows exactly how much a man's word is worth, remember, filed. Foreclosure. The Hartley farm, 160 acres, homesteaded 1868, barn raised 1911, in the legal notices of the county paper. Friends, where every neighbor we have ever had could read it over coffee, and where I read it too, at the library, at my own desk, in the paper I had been reading for 20 years, for entirely different reasons. And then came the emergency meeting, the money conversation, the one this whole story opened on, and now you know everything you need to feel that kitchen properly, so let us walk back in. 9 of them at the long table, friends. Todd at the head, in his father's chair, gray around the mouth. Arlene beside him with a legal pad, because Arlene organizing a catastrophe she helped cheer into being is a form of exercise. Cousins, spouses, a brother-in-law of Arlene's who sells boats and was there as, I promise you this was said out loud, our finance mind. And the plan, friends, the plan that got 9 adults to a kitchen table on a Tuesday was to pool money to catch up the arrears and refinance. They went around that table, friends, person by person, and what they scraped together in pledges between the boat seller and the cousins and Arlene's certificates of deposit came to $61,000 against a $412,000 hole, and it was somewhere in there, watching the arithmetic drown, that Arlene remembered the doorway and me in it, and produced her committee smile and said the sentence. Lois, you don't need to stay for this part. This is a money conversation. And friends, here is the detail I did not tell you at the top, because you were not ready for it yet. Todd looked up when she said it. My nephew, drowning, looked at me for 1 second, and I watched something move behind his eyes, some flicker of a man about to ask a question that would have changed everything. And then I watched the file drawer slide shut, poor Lois, harmless, available, slightly sad. And Todd said, yeah, no, of course. Thanks, Aunt Lois. We'll call you if we need. And he stopped. Friends, because there was no end to that sentence in his entire imagination. We'll call you if we need. Casseroles. The word he could not find was casseroles. So I went home to my little house, and I sat at my kitchen table with the composition book and the silver dollar. And friends, before I tell you what I decided, I have to tell you what I had already done, because this is the part of the story even Sage did not know. And when it came out later, it changed how every person in that family looked at every other one. 8 months before the auction, when the loan first went bad, I had gone quietly through my lawyer 2 counties over to the bank, and I had made an offer, anonymous, airtight. My lawyer called it a workout proposal, and here is what it said. An unnamed private party with verified funds would bring the mortgage fully current. Friends, all of it, every dollar of arrears, and restructure the remaining debt at terms softer than the bank's, on two conditions. One, an independent farm manager, chosen by the lender, would run operations for 5 years. Two, a full audit of the event barn spending, because somebody who reads term sheets for a hobby had noticed numbers that did not walk straight. That was it, friends. No confession, no revenge, no name. The farm saved, the debt tamed, and Todd still living in the farmhouse, demoted from king to resident, supervised into adulthood by a professional. It was, and I will say it myself, the single most generous thing I have ever constructed. And I built it anonymous for one reason, hear me, because a gift with my name on it would have been filed. And I could not risk the file, not for my pride, friends, for the offer's sake. Poor Lois's money would have been suspicious, contested, laughed at, slow-walked, and the clock was eating the farm. The bank took it to Todd, exactly as designed, a lifeline from an unnamed party, and Todd said no. Friends, my nephew turned it down flat, and I have the bank officer's summary in a folder, and I am going to read you Todd's reason in his own relayed words, because it is the purest sentence this family ever produced, and every family like ours has one man who eventually says it out loud. He said, "Tell your mystery investor the Hartleys don't need a babysitter on their own land. A babysitter. On their own land, friends. The land was 90 days from the courthouse steps, and the word that killed the rescue was babysitter. And if you have been with this channel a while, you know that the pride of unqualified men is the most expensive substance on this earth. It costs more than gold, more than lawyers, more than time. It cost 160 acres. So, that night after the money conversation at my kitchen table, with 61,000 pledged against 412, and the workout dead by pride, and the auction date circled in the legal notices, I opened the composition book and I turned to a clean page, and I sat there a long while with my father's silver dollar on the table in front of me, and then I wrote 4 words at the top of the page, fence wire straight, and here is where this story turns, friends. So read them with me. Harvest, paddle in hand. I was there for the grand opening, friends, or rather the second one, the one that finally happened, and I have to give you that afternoon because it was the exact middle of the fall, the place where you can see both slopes. They had a band, and a pig roast, and a bounce castle for the children, and Todd in a vest. Friends, a vest with the farm's new logo on it, Hartley Farms Experience, plural, farms. There is one farm. The plural was aspirational. Everything about that year was aspirational. And I walked that event barn slow, with a lemonade, the way I walk everything, and friends, I was not looking at the string lights. I was reading. I read the cut corners where the change orders had run out of patience. I read the parking field that drained wrong. You could see the standing water shine from the porch. A wet spring would drown 40 cars in it. I read the vendor faces, the caterer arguing quietly with a man over a check, the way you learn to read at a library desk where everyone believes they are being subtle. And I found Sage out by the fence line, away from the band, in her good dress and her work boots, arms crossed, and I stood next to her, and neither of us said anything for a while, 2 files in a bottom drawer. And then Sage said, "Lo, they didn't soil test the north parcel before they platted the parking." I told Todd the drainage was wrong. You know what he told me? I said, "Tell me, honey." He said, "Sage, sweetie, the numbers people have it handled. You stick to the flowers. The numbers people, friends." The man who could not spell amortization told the one Hartley who reads dirt to stick to the flowers. There is a version of this county where Todd handed his daughter the books and his aunt the phone, and that farm never saw a courthouse. And it was standing right there at the fence line in a good dress and work boots, invisible, the file passing down a generation while the band played. I put my arm around her shoulders. Friends, first time I ever did. And I said the thing I had waited my whole life to be old enough to say to someone. I said, honey, the flowers and the numbers are the same subject. Anyone who tells you different is about to lose a farm. And 8 months later, friends, the bank filed. And now you know why I was already at my lawyer's 2 counties over, with my composition book and my silver dollar, building the anonymous lifeline before the family had even had its first meeting. I did not need their meeting. I had read the parking lot. And I have to give you the collapse itself in its true colors, because the paper covered the numbers, but the paper does not sit at kitchen tables. The calls started that winter. Friends, family calls, the tree shaking itself. Arlene called her sister, who called the boat seller, who knew a guy who did hard money loans, and for one shining week, Todd was going to be rescued by a man from the city at 14%, until even Todd read that paperwork to the second page. They held a fundraiser. Friends, I want you to sit with this. The family that owned 160 acres held a spaghetti dinner at the Grange Hall, saved the family farm, $8 a plate, and the county came because the county is decent, and they raised $4,100 against a $412,000 debt, and Arlene stood at the door thanking people in the charity voice that had handed me coats for 20 years, and friends, I bought a plate. I stood in that line, and I paid my $8, and I ate spaghetti at a folding table under a banner with my own last name on it, across from neighbors who patted my hand about the family trouble, and nobody at the head table looked at me once. And in my dress pocket, folded small, was a letter from my bank confirming I could have retired the entire debt between the salad and the dessert. Why didn't I stand up right there, friends? I know some of you are shouting it at your screens. You have been shouting it for a while now. Here is the answer, and it is the coldest sentence I own, and I stand behind it, because a rescue they never asked me for would have been filed too. Poor Lois's little windfall, some insurance thing probably, wasn't that lucky, and the farm would have gone right back down the same pipe to the same hands, and in 5 years there would have been another vest, another brochure, another parking lot platted on wet clay, and my father's ground would be carrying my money down with it. The workout offer was my rescue, friends, the real one, built clean, with a manager and an audit, the 2 things that would have actually saved them, and they burned it on the word babysitter. After that, there was only one way left to save the farm, save it from them. So I ate my spaghetti, friends. I complimented the sauce. And I went home and called Dale and said the sentence 20 years of $50 paychecks had been waiting for. Dale, I said, start the paperwork. The farmer is going to the auction. Let me give you the morning of the auction properly, friends, the hours before the pavilion, because a woman does not walk into the biggest 10 minutes of her life cold. She builds a ramp to it, and mine had 3 boards. The first board was the dress. I own good clothes, friends. I have always owned a few, made by me, worn where no family could inventory them, and that morning I laid 2 choices on my bed. The gray dress, the librarian, the file, the camouflage that had protected the program for 20 years, and the green one. Deep bottle green, wool crepe, made by my own hands 2 winters ago for no occasion at all, because some part of me knew an occasion was coming, the way I smell rain. I stood over that bed a long time, friends, and I wore the gray. I want you to understand why, because it was not fear. The gray had earned the ending, friends. That cardigan had stood guard over $50 paychecks through 4 presidents. It had sat at the card table and worn the coats and eaten the spaghetti, and when the paddle went up, I wanted the file itself to go up with it. I wanted every person in that pavilion to see the exact woman they had appraised at nothing, unedited, cardigan and all, raising $600,000 in a voice that did not shake. You do not send a new soldier to accept the surrender, friends. You send the one who fought the war. The green dress got its day later. You will see. The second board was the book. At my kitchen table with my tea, I opened the composition book. 1991 on the first page. Hens, feed against eggs against market price, a 9-year-old's columns, and I turned every page, friends, all of them, the whole 35 years of it, the way you walk a field before you buy it. March 2006, planting $300. The 30s crossing in 2011, the laugh in the parking lot, the 1.1, the 2.1. And on the last written page, from the night of the money conversation, harvest, paddle in hand, and beneath it I wrote the morning's entry, the shortest one in the whole book, and I will give it to you. It says June 14th, going home. The third board picked me up at 8:15 in a farm truck, friends. Sage, in her good flannel with 2 thermoses, and she did not say good morning, she said, I already drove past the fairgrounds. Kepler's people are there early with a surveyor's wheel. They are measuring the parking like they own it. And her jaw was set, and I patted the dash and said, let them measure, honey. Men who measure before they pay always overpay. But I had her take the long way, friends, and she knew which long way without asking, and we drove out past the farm, one time around the section, slow, with the windows down, and the hay was cut on the north neighbor's piece, and the smell came across the road like 1991, and we did not stop. We did not trespass. I just read my land at 15 miles an hour one last time as a spectator. The barn, needing paint, standing plumb, my grandfather's joints holding through everything Todd had financed against them. The west field where Charles ended, in grass now. The farmhouse, blinds crooked, porch empty, and the second window from the left, upstairs, catching the early sun the way it has since 1911. Friends, that window has been catching the same sunrise through 5 generations of this family being wrong about each other. And at the stop sign where the section road meets the highway, Sage looked over at me, both hands on the wheel, her great-grandmother's chin, and she asked the only question she asked in that entire year of driving me. She said, how high will you go? And friends, I looked at that girl, the last Hartley, the difficult one, the one who reads dirt, and I told her the truth I had not even written in the book. I said, honey, there is a number in my purse that Dale made me promise not to pass. And there is no number in my chest at all. Pray the men quit before those two have to argue. And Sage nodded once, like a farmer taking a weather report, and pulled onto the highway, and neither of us said another word until the fairgrounds, and that, friends, is the whole recipe for courage at 44. A dress that earned it, a book that proves it, and one person in the truck who does not need it explained. The auction was held on a Saturday in June at the Fairgrounds Pavilion because the county had 3 foreclosures that day and ours was the main event. Friends, everybody knew it, 110 years of one family's name on the block between a repossessed excavator and somebody's lake lot. If you have stayed with me this far, tap that like button now, friends, because you have earned this next part, and I promise you, I am going to walk you through it, bid by bid. I prepared for that Saturday like it was a wedding and a war. With Dale, my credit union man of 30 years, I moved what needed moving weeks early, and the cashier's arrangements were made, and the proof of funds letter sat in my purse, the same purse. Friends, the one that walked out of the money conversation. With my lawyer, I registered to bid in advance, papers clean, and when the clerk handed me my paddle at the check-in table that morning, I looked at the number on it, friends, and I had to hold the table edge for a second. Paddle 41. I did not request it. I do not explain it. I am a librarian. I do not traffic in signs and wonders. But my father's silver dollar is dated 1941, and it was in my dress pocket when the girl handed me paddle 41, and you may do with that whatever your own heart does with such things. Mine took it as a co-signature. The pavilion was full. 200 people, friends, neighbors, landmen, the curious, the vultures, and my family, all of them, clustered near the front like mourners, Arlene in sunglasses indoors, Todd gray as oatmeal, cousins holding each other's crossed arms, and I stood where I have stood my whole life, friends, rear third, near the aisle, where the overflow stands, and not one of them registered me any more than they registered the flag on the pole. Poor Lois came to watch, someone whispered. I know because Sage was standing next to me, and Sage heard it, and Sage's jaw set like concrete, and I touched her wrist once. The way you gentle a colt, easy, honey. Let them file. And there was one more man in that front section, friends, and you have been waiting for him. Brett Kepler. Kepler Development, city outfit, the capped teeth, the quarter zip, the man whose company had already tiled 4 farms in this county into vinyl villages with names like an air freshener catalog, and he had a folder under his arm and a young woman beside him doing math on a tablet, and he stood there loose and friendly. Friends, chatting with the auctioneer's staff, the way a man stands when he has already spent the afternoon in his head. Heritage Meadows. The sign renderings existed, friends. We found them later, on his company's website, cached, our barn photoshopped into a clubhouse. The auctioneer read the legal description of the property and the terms, and then, friends, then it began, and I want you to be inside my chest for it, so here is the truth. My heart was going like a hen house with a fox in it, and my face, Sage swears to this day, my face looked like I was waiting for a bus. 20 years of practice, friends. The file has its uses. Bidding opened at $300,000, bank's floor. A landman took it at $310. Another at $325. Kepler entered at $350. Lazy, flicking 2 fingers, a man swatting at the opening the way you swat a screen door, and the landmen pushed him to $390 before the first of them folded. $400, $410, and friends at $412,000, the exact size of the hole Todd dug. I heard my sister-in-law make a sound into her tissue, because the family had nursed some fantasy that the bidding might die under the debt and leave them room to negotiate scraps. $425. The second landman shook his head and was out, and it was Kepler and one stubborn dairy operator from the North End, and the dairyman had heart, friends. He carried it to $465 with his cap in his hand, and then he looked at his wife, and she looked down, and that was that. Going once at $465 to Mr. Kepler, said the auctioneer. Going twice. And friends, the pavilion had gone quiet the way a field goes quiet before weather, and inside that quiet, my father said, "Plant where they can't trample." And my mother said, "Stand up straight," and 20 years of $50 paychecks stood up inside me all at once like a congregation, and I raised paddle 41, and I heard my own voice, library level, carry across 200 people. 500,000 friends. The sound a crowd makes when it has to reshelve a human being, all at once, in 1 second, is a sound I will hear on my deathbed and smile. 200 necks. The auctioneer blinked at me, found his rhythm. 500,000, new bidder, thank you, ma'am. And Brett Kepler turned around in his quarter zip to see what the county had produced, and I watched him take me in. Friends, the cardigan, the paddle, the 44 years of me, and I watched him smile a little, and turn back, and raise 510 like a man tipping a valet. He thought I was a heart attack, friends, a sentimental, small-town librarian with a fifth of what it takes. In over her head, good for one bid. 520, I said. 530, said Kepler, not turning around. 540, 550, and now his girl's tablet was up and her thumb was moving. Friends, because their pro forma had a ceiling in it. Every developer's folder has a ceiling, the number where Heritage Meadows stops penciling, and I did not know his ceiling, but I knew mine, and mine had been set at my kitchen table with Dale and a composition book, and mine was 575. Friends, prudent, sensible, protecting the rest of the program. 560, I said. 570, said Kepler, and turned around again, and this time he was not smiling. This time he gave me the look. The one every woman my age knows, the be reasonable look, the this is for the men at the table look, the Lois you don't need to stay for this part look. And friends, forgive me. The ceiling was 575. I looked at Brett Kepler's capped teeth, and I put my hand in my pocket, around a silver dollar my father carried through droughts I only read about, and I heard the auctioneer say 575 to the lady. Do I hear 585? And Kepler's paddle twitched up, 585, and the tablet girl grabbed his sleeve, friends grabbed it, and he shook her off, because now it was not his pro forma bidding, now it was his teeth. And I said, 600,000, flat, library level. And the pavilion made the sound again, and Brett Kepler stood very still for 4 seconds. Friends, 4. I counted them in heartbeats, and then he did the arithmetic that separates money men from proud men. He remembered he was only one of the two, and he laughed, a little theater laugh for the crowd, and waved his folder in surrender and sat down. Going once, 600,000. Going twice, sold. And the auctioneer, reading his sheet, said, sold to paddle 41, and ma'am, for the record, state your name. And I said it, friends. And the pavilion did not react because it did not compute, and the auctioneer, bless him, leaned into the microphone and said it again, confirming, Lois Hartley. And a murmur started, and somewhere a chair scraped, and he said it the third time. Friends, with the gavel in his hand and half a smile, because auctioneers know a story when they are standing in one sold, the Hartley Farm, 160 acres to Miss Lois Hartley, $600,000. 3 times, friends. They heard it the first time. They filed it on the third. And in the front section, my family turned around. Friends, all of them, one motion, like a hayfield when the wind changes. And I stood in the overflow where they had kept me for 20 years, holding paddle 41, and I looked back at every last one of them. And the only person in that pavilion whose face I will describe is Sage's, because hers is the only one that matters. My niece was crying, friends, and grinning, both at once, structural, and she leaned over to me in all that noise and said the finest sentence anyone has ever said to me in my life. She said, there were still hens in the book. What happened in the next 10 minutes, friends, I could sell tickets to, but I will give it to you free. They came up the aisle in a wave, my family, and the wave had one shape and 2 speeds. Todd got there first, gray gone to blotchy, hand out, half laughing. Aunt Lois, oh my God, Aunt Lois, we had no idea. This is incredible. And behind him, Arlene, sunglasses up on her head now, arms already opening. Lois, honey, and friends, I want you to notice the vocabulary that arrived with the money. Honey. 40 years of poor Lois, and honey showed up 11 seconds after the gavel, and the cousins, and the boat seller, all of it warm as a kitchen, and in the middle of the warmth, Todd said the thing they had all carried up the aisle. He said, so what happens now? When can do we just move the payments over to you, or how do you want to? And he stopped, friends, the way he stops, because there was an assumption inside that sentence so large, he had never once thought to check it. The assumption that the farm, having been rescued, would now flow back down the same old pipe, to the son, to the name, to Todd, with Aunt Lois as the new bank, which is to say, the new nothing. And I let the pavilion get quiet around us, friends, because I had waited 20 years and I was not going to rush the best paragraph of my life. And then I said it, gently, clearly, the way you read the ending of a story to children who have guessed it wrong. I said, Todd, honey, nothing moves over to you. The farm is not coming back to you. It is coming back to me. And my nephew's face, friends, did a thing I have only ever seen paper do in a fire. And Arlene stepped in with the committee smile. Lois, let's not make decisions when we're all emotional. This is family land. And I looked at that woman, friends, the coats, the funerals, the card table, the doorway, and I did not raise my voice because the file was right about one thing. I am harmless. Right up until the arithmetic, I said, Arlene, it has been family land for 110 years. It stopped being family land for exactly 1 generation, the one that mortgaged it for a corn maze, and I have just now bought it back with money I grew $50 at a time while this family handed me its practically new coats. So yes, honey, it is family land again, as of today. And the family, friends, is going to be defined, from here forward, at my table, by who shows up when there is no money conversation on the agenda. And I turned and Sage drove me home in her truck, and neither of us said one word for 10 miles, and then both of us laughed until she had to pull over by the Miller Lake turnoff. Friends, the laugh of the 2 files from the bottom drawer, and if you have ever laughed that laugh, you know it has tears mixed all through it and no sadness anywhere in it. Now the reckonings, quick and clean, and then I will take you home, because there is a window waiting. The papers closed in 30 days, friends, and I will not pretend the number did not sting. 600,000 is real money even against 2.1 million. But here is what my composition book says about it, and the book does not lie. The glacier will grow it back, friends. Glaciers hold no grudges and keep no calendars. Compounding forgives a righteous withdrawal. Write that down. Todd got 90 days from me, in writing, through my lawyer, to relocate his household, twice what the law required and half what Arlene demanded, and he spent the first month telling the county I had betrayed the family, friends, the family, that word again, doing all its old work, and the county, God bless it, did not buy a single share. Because the county remembered the 6 years with Mother. The county had watched the coats and the card table for 2 decades. Friends, small towns file everything too. They just file it accurately. And then, about 6 weeks after the auction, came the afternoon that broke the whole thing open, the revelation I promised you, and it did not come from me. It came from the bank. Todd, trying to refinance his truck of all things, was in with the loan officer, and the loan officer, making conversation, said something about, well, it worked out for your family in the end. Shame about the workout offer last winter, though. That would have saved everybody the courthouse. And Todd said, what workout offer? Friends. The bank officer, assuming the family knew, laid it out. The anonymous party, the full cure of the arrears, the soft restructure, the farm manager, the audit, the whole lifeline, and the answer that had killed it. Tell your mystery investor the Hartleys don't need a babysitter on their own land. And Todd sat in that little glass office, friends, and did the only piece of hard arithmetic of his life. There was exactly one person in this county with that kind of money and that kind of interest in the Hartley farm, and he had just spent 6 weeks watching her sign the deed. The anonymous party had been the card table. The babysitter he refused had been the woman who fed his grandmother for 6 years. He drove to my little house that same evening, friends, and I will give Todd this one thing, and I give it freely. He did not send Arlene, and he did not bring a lawyer, and he did not call first. He stood on my porch with his cap actually in his hands, 25 years old. And when I opened the door, he said, I found out today what you tried to do in January. I came to say the word. And he said it, friends. Not sorry. Everyone can say sorry. He said, I was the babysitter, wasn't I? The whole time it was me who needed one, and you offered me a way to keep my pride and the farm both, and you did it with no name on it, so I would never even have to thank you, and I called it an insult. Aunt Lois, I have been stupid about you my whole life, and my dad was stupid about you his whole life, and I think his dad started it, and somebody in this family has to be the first one to just say it plain. You were never the poor one. We were. Friends, I stood in my doorway with my hand on the frame, and a lifetime of the file blew off the table all at once. And I looked at my brother's boy, homeless off his own pride, finally holding one true thing, and I said what the women of this family say when the wheel finally turns. I said, supper's at 6 on Sundays, Todd. Bring your daughter. That was 2 years ago, friends. Here is where everything stands as I tell you this, and then the window, and then I will let you go. I live at the farm. I moved home 20 years after I left it, into the upstairs bedroom I was born in, second window from the left, and the first morning I woke up there, I stood at that window in my nightgown with coffee, and I watched the sun come up over the east fence exactly the way it did when I was 9 years old with a composition book, friends, and I stood there and I let it climb all the way clear of the tree line before I even took a sip, because nobody was waiting for me to be useful, and the view was mine, deed and dirt and window and all. My father was right, friends. The wheel turns. He just never guessed the hand that would be on it. Sage runs the ground. That is the sign I promised you. My niece quit the job her mother had negotiated her into, and she farms, friends, actually farms, vegetables and cut flowers and pastured hens. Hens, of course hens, 40 acres in production and a farm stand that the county lines up at on Saturdays, and she has the head and the hands both That girl, the seed came down crooked for 3 generations and landed straight in her. The event barn, Todd's $400,000 monument, is paid for and full of flowers every June. Friends, Sage rents it out for exactly the weddings Todd dreamed of, except profitable. And the first wedding held in it was her own, last spring. And I sat in the front row. The front row, friends, on the long table side of every room, from now on, forever. And Todd works the farm's books, under audit, under Sage, and he is better at it than anyone expected. Humility turns out to be excellent training for accounting. And Arlene comes to Sunday supper and is almost learning where the serving spoons live in a kitchen she queened over for 25 years. And we are not healed, friends. Do not let me sell you a greeting card. We are something better than healed. We are corrected. Before the gate sign, friends, I owe you 2 more evenings at the farm, because they are where the story actually finishes. The paperwork only ever finishes the plot. The first evening is the first Sunday supper, 6 weeks after I moved home. I cooked for 2 days, friends. My mother's kitchen, my hands, her recipes, the good china out of both cabinets, the twin sets reunited after 23 years, and when the family came, uncertain on their best behavior, half of them expecting to be seated by rank and lectured, they found the dining room changed. I had hired the Meyer boy to build a table, friends, 1 table, 14 feet of oak, 1 long top, benches and chairs mixed, room for 18, and it fills that dining room wall to wall, and there is no other table in the house. Do you understand what I am telling you, friends? There is no card table. I burned it. I am not speaking in figures. I burned the actual card table in the burn barrel behind the barn the week I moved in, alone, at sunset. And I stood there with a cup of coffee and watched 20 years of the doorway seat go up the pipe in sparks. And I said out loud, to nobody, to every overflow child this family ever folded into a doorway, all ashore that's going ashore. And at that first supper, when the seating shuffle started, the old dance, who ranks where, I stood at the head of 14 feet of oak and said the only seating chart this farm will ever have again. Sit anywhere. There is no below the salt at this table. There is only the table. And a 6-year-old, one of the cousin's boys, wedged himself proudly between me and Sage, friends, at what any archaeologist of this family would have called the head, and nobody corrected him, and Arlene watched that child eat his rolls in the seat of honor, and I watched her decide, with visible effort, to survive it. And that, friends, is what recovery looks like in a family like mine. Nobody announces the new constitution. You just burn the furniture that enforced the old one. The second evening is Thanksgiving, friends, the first one, and it is the last thing I will tell you before the gate, because I promised you the letter would be heard right, and it was, and here is how. 18 of us, 1 table, my mother's china down the whole length of it like a runway, and when the pie went around, I stood up. And friends, in 25 years of Thanksgivings in that room, I had never once stood up. Standing up was for people whose names were on windows. The room went quiet on its own. And I said, before this family eats dessert in this house, there is a piece of mail that has been waiting 23 years for its audience, and it was addressed to me. But I have come to understand it was addressed to all of us. And I took my father's 3 pages out of my apron pocket, friends, the actual pages, amber tape marks still on the envelope, and I put on my reading glasses, and at the table where he could never say it, in the house where he could never say it, I read this family Emmett Hartley's letter, every word, in the steadiest library voice I own. The time's won, Lois. The banker sees a wife that hasn't happened yet. I was not strong enough to fight the times, girl. You were always the farmer. Plant where they can't trample. Friends, you could hear the furnace tick. Todd sat with his fists on either side of his plate, staring at the wood, a man watching 3 generations of plumbing get X-rayed at his own dinner. Sage did not move at all, except her eyes shone. And Arlene, friends, Arlene, of the coats and the committee smile and the hospice thank yous, Arlene broke first, and not delicately. She put her face in her napkin, 53 years old, and sobbed once, hard, from somewhere real, and when she came up for air, she said, to the table, to nobody, to everybody. He knew. The whole time we treated her like the leftovers, the old man knew, and he wrote it down, and we made her find it behind a drawer. 20 years, Lois. You sat at that card table for 20 years with this letter in your house? And I said, gently, because gently was finally affordable, friends. I said, no, Arlene. I sat there at first because of the times, same times that beat my father. But the last 20, honey, I sat there because it was the best seat in the house for watching, and I had crops coming that needed no audience. The times lose eventually, friends. That is the whole gospel of this channel, and they lose to the patient. And when I folded those pages back up, my family sat looking at each other down 14 feet of oak like people introduced at a funeral, which in a way they were, and then the 6-year-old asked if he could see the silver dollar. And the room breathed, and we ate pie. His name is Wesley. Friends, the 6-year-old. He can already tell you the price of eggs at the farm stand against the price of feed, unprompted, columns straight, and Sage and I have an understanding about him. Unspoken, the way our understandings run. The book has room, friends. The book always has room. And the gate. At the road where the mailbox stands, there has been a plank sign since my grandfather's day, and it said Hartley Farm. And it came down in a windstorm years back, and nobody ever got around to it. And for as long as I have been grown, the gate said nothing at all. There is a new sign now, friends. Sage painted it herself, letters fence wire straight, and she hung it without asking me, the way the difficult ones do their loving, and I cried at my own mailbox when I saw it, and here is what it says. Hartley Farm, East, 1868, L. Hartley and daughters, friends, 110 years of this family, and the gate finally says it. 3 loose threads, friends, and I tie every thread. You know that about me by now. Kepler first. 6 months after the auction, a letter arrived from Kepler Development Creamstock, embossed, addressed to L. Hartley, proprietor, which I will admit I enjoyed. And inside was an offer, a handsome one, for the 18 acres of road frontage along the highway. Perfect, the letter said, for a retail pad site, and the number attached had clearly been calculated to be irresistible to a fixed-income senior. It was almost double what the dirt appraises at, friends. And I want you to know I gave it honest consideration for the length of 1 cup of tea, because spite is bad bookkeeping and I audit myself hardest of all, and then I wrote back, by hand, on my plain stationery. And the entire letter said this. Dear Mr. Kepler, thank you for your generous offer on the frontage. I must decline. That parcel is where the hens are. Yours, L. Hartley. That parcel is where the hens are, friends. It is technically true Sage's layer flock ranges that piece, and it is also the truest sentence I have ever mailed, because that ground holds every hen this story ever counted, the 1967 flock, the composition book, the $50 paychecks, all of it, and no clause Brett Kepler will ever draft can price a woman's hens. He did not write again. His girl with the tablet did, though, friends, and this is my favorite footnote in the whole affair. She quit Kepler that winter, and she wrote to me, 2 pages, and she said watching the auction was the first time in 6 years of development work she had ever seen the spreadsheet lose. And she wanted to learn the other kind of math, and she works at the credit union with Dale now, and she teaches a Saturday class at my library. Friends, Personal Finance for Women, free, 2nd floor, the room where the investing books live. Full circle is not a figure of speech in a county like mine. It is a road you can drive. Thread 2, the library. The program did not stop compounding when the farm came home. Friends, glaciers do not retire, and a woman who has lived on a librarian's wage for 20 years is not about to develop expensive habits at 44. So this spring, the county library announced a gift. The children's room is being rebuilt, doubled, new summer reading wing, endowed permanently, and there are 2 names on the plaque, and neither one is mine. It says, the Vera Hartley Children's Room. My mother, friends who read to me in the upstairs bedroom until her eyes gave out, and who told my father the cabinet should go to me, which means every dollar of this story passed through her hands first, whether anybody knew it or not. And under her name, small, one line it says, funded in memory of Emmett Hartley, who kept his seed money for the farmer. The county thinks it is a farm expression, friends. Let them. You and I know what it says. And thread 3, the green dress. I told you it would get its day, and its day came last spring at the first wedding ever held in Todd's event barn, which is to say Sage's wedding, and friends, my niece did not get married the way the brochure imagined. No corporate sponsor, no string quartet in matching vests. She married her welder in the barn her father mortgaged everything to build, with the doors rolled open to the west field. Wildflowers she grew herself in feed store buckets down both sides of the aisle, and the county potluck laid out on hay wagons, and every person at that wedding had dirt on their boots or history with mine. And it was, the old ladies agreed. And old ladies are the authority, the finest wedding this county has produced in 50 years. I wore the green dress, friends. Bottle green wool crepe, made by my own hands for no occasion because I smelled the occasion coming years off, and I sat in the front row, the actual front row, on a chair with my name taped to it in Sage's fence wire printing, and when she came down that aisle on her brother Todd's arm, my nephew crying so hard he had to stop twice, I sat in my green dress with my mother's brooch and let the whole barn see exactly what the file never held. And there was one more thing about that morning, friends. One thing nobody in the barn knew, but two of us. An hour before the ceremony, in the farmhouse kitchen, Sage came to me holding her bouquet, feed store zinnias, and her own ranunculus, and she said, "Aunt Lois, I have my something new and my something borrowed, and I know exactly what I want for my something old, and I have known for a year, and I am not asking so much as collecting." And she held out her hand. Friends, palm up. The way you hold your hand out for something you already know the shape of. So I reached into my pocket, where it has lived through every financial decision since 2006, and I laid my father's 1941 silver dollar in my niece's palm, and Sage wrapped it into the stems of her bouquet with floral wire, fence wire straight, and she carried Emmett Hartley's seed money down the aisle of the barn, built on his ground, past his whole family, in the sunlight. She gave it back that night, friends, for now. We both said for now at the same moment, and neither of us explained it, and that kitchen, that coin, that girl, is what all the money was ever for. Not the acres, the hand, held out, already knowing the shape. The harvest you cannot auction, so now you know the whole of it, the cabinet, the letter, the glacier, the paddle, the window, and I will leave you the way my father left me, with the only instruction that ever mattered, and you do not need 160 acres to follow it. I grew $3 million in a 2-bedroom house on a librarian's wage. Plant where they can't trample. Whatever your dirt is, friends, money, skill, love, a hen book, plant it quiet and plant it every payday, and do not waste one breath arguing with people about your worth. The file never gets reprinted by argument. It gets reprinted by harvest. And when the wheel turns, and it always turns, stand where they put you, in the overflow, near the aisle, and raise your paddle, and say your name in a voice that does not shake. They will need to hear it 3 times. Say it 3 times. You will have earned every syllable. My father carried a silver dollar for 50 years because his father handed it to him the day the barn went up. It is in my pocket right now, friends. Next spring at the farm stand, when the first tomatoes come in, it goes in an envelope taped somewhere only one person will ever find it. There is a letter with it. It starts, Sage. You were always the farmer.